We're coming to the end of another La Jolla conference, the 24th annual La Jolla conference. And, you know, the last few years, it just wouldn't be a La Jolla conference without Duncan Wood being here. Duncan, welcome back.
Thanks a lot, and congratulations. It was a terrific event.
Thanks so much. So let's talk about, before we talk about your participation, let's talk about something that came up in a variety of ways over the last couple of days. Energy diplomacy, U.S. policy vis-a-vis the region, but a specific issue, and you're the director of the Mexico Institute at the Wilson Center, so you're in D.C., you focus on Mexico. There's a request from Pemex from Mexico to do a swap of oil to the United States to allow a swap with the United States in terms of crude oil export. It's a big deal. It could say a lot in terms of energy relations. What's going on with that, and will that happen anytime soon?
Well, first of all, I think that the way to approach this is to really look at North America stroke the Americas as increasingly becoming an integrated energy market. And if you want to have an integrated energy market, which is really in pretty much everybody's benefit, you need to facilitate the flow of goods and services between them. In the same way as we went through the NAFTA 20 years ago. Yeah, we need to think about it in these terms. So whilst a crude swap between Mexico and the United States is not really a free market, I think it's an important step forward. And it makes a lot of sense, as you know, most of the people who watch this video understand. It makes sense because Mexico needs that light crude to blend in with its own mix. And the United States has a demand for heavier crude in its refineries as well. It's kind of a win-win situation. Why wouldn't it go forward? Well, there's lots of reasons on the political front, obviously. People who are afraid that this is the first step towards a removal of the crude oil export ban. The fact that you know, there's this belief that it'll raise prices in the United States ultimately. I mean, I think that there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic that this issue will go through, just because although some people could say it's a step in that direction, that really what we're seeing is this is a controlled flow of crude between the two countries. It's relatively minor scale, and we're not talking about, you know, millions of barrels a day. And I think that this is something which should be politically feasible, at least within the next 12-month period. And to be honest with you, I think it would be a great sign of good faith between the two nations.
Right. I mean, and I think that you and I have, look, we've written pieces about this kind of stuff, and, you know, whether it's the Transboundary Hydrocarbon Agreement, you know, do this. These are easy lifts in a lot of ways. And they're easy lifts, but in terms of the return on investment, bilateral relationship-wise, it's such a good return on investment. Absolutely.
It's about partnership here. In the same way that Mexico desperately needs the natural gas that's going to flow from the United States into Mexico through the new pipelines, Mexico needs this light crude to be able to make its refinery system work. And the United States will benefit from this as well. Not just because they're getting rid of some of that potentially excess light crude that they have, but they're also getting the heavy crude into the market as well. And I think this is what friends do with each other. Friends actually find ways to seek out mutual benefit.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, I think you and I line up on this, and I would guess most people tuning into this video do as well. So let's dial in directly on Mexico, the reform. I mean, here we are, a year plus, you know, into the reform. You had a very interesting comment during the panel discussion earlier today, and let's reprise that a little bit in as much as we can here, because we'll obviously not have the same fireworks that ensued. But you used this analogy of a telenovela for the energy reform and where we see it today. You know, that I've been hearing people say telenovela ever since. I've never watched telenovelas, so help me understand what the hell you were talking about.
Well, telenovelas are obviously a crucial part, not just of Mexican culture, but of Latin American culture. And you might argue that telenovela or soap opera is now a fundamental part of human culture in the television age. I think what we've seen in the Mexican reform process is that we've seen many elements of the telenovela. It's going to be an imperfect allegory, of course, but the fact is that we came into the telenovela, into the reform process with a classic telenovela situation, an impending crisis. How are we going to overcome this? And then we began to see the movement towards a love affair between the Mexican government as they go through the opening of the Mexican energy sector and the private sector, foreign investors who look at Mexico, who's doing all of the right things, and they're saying this is a place where we can do business. And so you're seeing this coming together, and it really is a bit of a love affair, not just on the energy front, but for the past couple of years on the structural reforms that have been implemented by the Enrique Peña Nieto government. And so we've seen all this focus on Mexico, all this positive buzz about the country, and then as with any good movie or soap opera, we saw this moment where, you know, we reached a kind of a crisis. And that's really when the contract terms were released in December of last year. And private investors looked at Mexico and said, you've done everything right up to this point, and now you've issued contract terms that we're not happy with. And the Mexican government said, but hang on, we're willing to talk about this. We don't negotiate because that's not what we do, but we're willing to have a conversation. And that conversation began, and we were all kind of in suspense for a while. Yeah. And then in February of this year, they issued revised contract terms, and the private sector came back and said, it's a good start, but it's not quite enough. We're still not happy with this. And so we're waiting to see whether or not you are willing to make the necessary changes to get us to actually make the bids that you want on this. And one of the crucial questions that I see here, you know, in the telenovela framework, is to say, are we actually going to make it in time? We're in a bit of a cliffhanger situation right now. We've got until the end of this month, or to the 29th of May, to really see if those changes are made to the final contract terms. If they are, we're looking at a happy ending. If not, then perhaps the number of bids, and more importantly, I would say, the quality of bids that we see in July won't be there. Is that the end of the story? Absolutely not. There'll be a sequel. And the sequel will be the other calls in the first round. And then, of course, there'll be Ronda Dos, Ronda Tres. This is a long-term process. As the industry always likes to say, we're talking about 25 years at least here. Well, this is going to be an ongoing process, and there's lots of time for learning. There's lots of time for making mistakes and for correcting those mistakes.
And I guess just to, you know, finalize this conversation, the protagonists of the telenovela, we may not even know who the main protagonists are in the next sequel, or the sequel after the next sequel, or, and what I'm talking about is the political players and some of the,
absolutely,
you know, and so what those implications may be. So stay tuned, I think, as they say in the business, huh?
There's always time for new characters to enter the plot. Yeah, absolutely.
Apart from us. These characters are going to be around for a while, right?
As long as you keep inviting me.
Yeah, Duncan Wood, great to have you here in La Jolla.
Thanks so, Jeremy.
much.